Hi there. I've had a few requests from people who couldn't get on the mock because it was sold out on what did I cover and what areas did I see as things that we should maybe review before the exam. So this presentation relates to the March 2026 material. Let me talk to you about the mock, what we covered, and what you should look at. So the mock day is a day where we can practice a mock exam that gets marked by ACCA SPL official markers on a mock that's written about the pre-seen material. You get a little bit more than just the mock though, and what you will get an introduction to the course. You'll get an introduction to some revision resources, so how we analyse the pre-seen, articles on revision, on motivation, on how to keep your brain working, links to some podcasts, articles on planning, on exam technique, which are ACCA official publications, most of them. We've then got something on mock timing advice, why it is so important. And then students having completed their mock on the ACCA iAssess platform, not Word, not Excel, not any of the other copies, but the actual platform you'll be doing your exam on, you submit it here. And then having submitted it, it gets marked by ACCA examiners, and I give you comprehensive feedback, not just a few ticks, but lots of comments on what you need to improve on. So the pre-seen is loaded up here. You will have been sent this by the ACCA. So just to remind you, this pre-seen was about Mercer, which was a publishing company, and we had information that we needed to become familiar with. There is a separate webinar talking about the pre-seen material, and you can find that on my YouTube channel. But let's have a look at the actual questions which we looked at. For each of these questions, I did give a full review, so you would get a video review of the questions and how to approach them. The thing with SPL is there's not always one correct answer, so it's good if I can instill confidence and show you the various answers, so that would come into the video review. I also give a realistic answer and I suggest some marking schemes. But let's have a look at the final mock questions and what did I ask students based on my experience having worked with the education team for probably 25 years, and what would I suggest you don't miss out? I'm not saying these are exams that are going to come up in the exam, but I strongly recommend you reacquaint yourself with these syllabus areas. So let's have a look. So on the mock, I created my own exhibits. I gave an exhibit that was talking about a financial and operation review. And in this review, it was just talking about the facilities, the printing, and there was a reference to whether maybe they were going to outsource some of the printing or not. Yeah, but no final decision had been made. There was then an exhibit I wrote about the portfolio. So when we're a business and we have multiple products like Mercer does at different stages of success, that is often known as a portfolio. And in this pre-seen, I talked about how 25% of the titles generated 70% of the profit, 40% were marginal, 15% were making losses. And yeah, just some description on it. So maybe there might be a question in that area. We will see in a moment. I then created an exhibit which was based on an investigation into a freelance author who potentially was involved in plagiarism. So there's kind of ethical dynamics that we need to consider here. And then the final exhibit that I created was an article from the newspaper. It was talking about a cyber attack, and it was asking, well, just kind of going into the detail about the implications of it. So they would be the exhibits. I would always recommend in an exam you read the tasks first, because then you read the exhibits with purpose. So if we were to look at task 1 here, the first requirement I asked students to look at was to prepare a report which evaluates the benefits and drawbacks of outsourcing. So if you have not looked at outsourcing for a while, I'd strongly recommend that you take a look at outsourcing, why we do it, and maybe why we wouldn't do it. Yep. So that was the first question. There would be a commercial angle through the lens of commercial acumen you would need to consider here as well. And then the second part asked you to prepare an analysis of Mercer's magazine portfolio. Yeah, what title should we retain, what should be restructured, or what should be divested? Yeah. So if we were looking at this particular task, how would we answer it? Let me share with you how I would want you to answer it. So in order to answer the question on outsourcing, my advice to you would be to first of all do a brainstorm on outsourcing. What would the benefits of outsourcing be? It might be outsourcer expertise. The outsourcer might be cheaper because they've got economies of scale. So the first thing I do a brainstorm on outsourcing. So why would we outsource? Well, we'd often outsource because it's not our area of core competence and we want to focus on what we're good at. So therefore we get someone else to do printing. We're a publishing company in this situation. Outsourcers might also be cheaper because they have economies of scale. They might give us flexibility to turn up the volume or turn down the volume, but there's downsides to outsourcing in that we do become a bit reliant on the outsourcer. We rely on them also for maintaining quality, and they might not keep up to speed with it all. So I do my brainstorm, and then I think about how does that brainstorm work in the context of what is a publishing company. And look at what I've done. I've done it in report format. I've done financial implications insofar as I mentioned that if we have internal printing, it's going to have a lot of capital investment. We, when having outsourcing, don't anymore have the fixed cost of printing presses, but we have a variable cost of printing to the volume which we need. So the main point I want to get across here is not about outsourcing. You can maybe go and review that in your notes, but look how it's laid out. Look at the subheadings. Look at the white space. Yep. Look at what we've done there. And also we've written what we've written because there are 18 marks here. People say how many marks per point? I would say a maximum of 2 marks a point, but you really have to develop your point with a so what, a why, a consequence of what you've just said if you want to move a 1 mark point to a 2 mark point. If we look to the answer to part 1b, where we talked about portfolio analysis, when I think of portfolio analysis, I probably think about the BCG matrix. I think about cash cows and dogs and question marks. So that might have come in my brainstorm, but I wouldn't really have used that in my answer. So the requirements were asking us, which do we retain, which do we restructure, and which do we divest? So if you look at the answer I've given here, I talk about retain the profitable titles. Why do I retain those profitable titles? Well, I retain them because they provide cash flow. They have strong advertiser relationships often. They have loyal readerships. Yep. And why we retain them is because they generate cash to fund future growth, to fund maybe digital transformation. Yep. I also look at those titles with marginal profits. Essentially, what's helping me here is question mark from the BCG, but I don't mention BCG anywhere. Don't forget, this is a practical work-based placed exam. You're not going to get any marks for theory, and to be honest, it doesn't look very professional. I then suggest how we divest loss-making titles. Why do we divest them? Well, because they're a drain on the capital. But please take notice of my layout. The marker loves layouts like this. Make their life easy, please. Yep. I also bring in other things that we should consider: brand strength, sustainability issues, and stakeholder issues. So what I want to get across to you here is there is a portfolio. How do we analyze portfolios? We normally analyze them with something like the BCG matrix, maybe product lifecycle. So make sure you have a look at those areas. Following task 1, in task 2, I talked about information needs of key stakeholder groups and how could they be met by integrated reporting. There's lots of stakeholders. To communicate and keep stakeholders happy, how do we do it? Well, remind yourself about integrating reporting. That does not mean give a regurgitation of the 6 capitals, but the 6 capitals will be a very useful way of communicating to our broader church of stakeholders. We then were asked to think about key performance indicators for each of those capitals in the context of Mercer Publishing Company. Yep. So that was what we did. And then the final part of this was talking about a cyber attack. Don't forget, we had that in an exhibit. So, if you were concerned about a cyber attack, what would you do? Well, you were asked to prepare slides with accompanying notes. Why do cybersecurity require special attention in the Mercer digital environment? And what measures would you take to minimize a cyber attack? You must do it in slide format. The professional skills here were for communication skills. If it is a slide and the communication skills are the professional skills marks and you don't do a slide, you lose all of them. So please take notice of that. For task 3, we went and discussed about the issues of the plagiarism incident that I had covered in an exhibit. Yep. So, you're a publishing company. One of your authors has been copying stuff. What is the consequence of that? So this wasn't a regurgitation necessarily of theory. This was thinking about what's going on here. There was some structure given to your answer by the requirements, and always look at this. So you should consider legal exposure, reputational consequences, impact of key stakeholder groups. What about internal control weaknesses, and what about long-term strategic consequences if we don't address this properly? So we'd need to plan that. We'd need to think, do we have enough to get, well, we don't need 14 marks, but I would be aiming for 60-70% of the 14 marks. Yep. And then the second part of this question was about suspending a journalist. So should we just suspend the journalist or and resume the publication, or is there something wrong? And professional skills here were for skepticism. So when we're being skeptical, we don't take things at face value. We challenge, and here the CEO said, oh, that's okay. Well, you would be challenging it in a skeptical way. It's probably not okay because you haven't done a full investigation. It's not okay because it's not about the person, it's about the system. And I developed some answers here in the context of whether that was actually ethically acceptable. So again, that relied on you thinking in the context of the printing company. So that's what I did on my mock. In addition to my mock, I also put in quite a few other questions which could be asked in the context of the pre-C material that we've got. So let me have a look at other things I looked at. Well, other things I had a look at, they were a listed company, so there's always going to be governance issues there. So this question just really honed in on your governance knowledge. What would be the benefit of a more diverse board? How could board diversity help with digital transformation? And then the second bit was we got to, what should we do into our nominations committee to improve diversity of the board? And what we're going to do with recruitment, succession, regulatory issues, and what's going to happen there. And what we have to look at that question through the lens of commercial acumen. So make sure you brush up on your corporate governance knowledge. The next question I created for my students was on change. Obviously, there's going to be digital transformation. To just make the answer a little bit more focused, I created another exhibit here, and it was about digital transformation and what is going on. And basically, the digital transformation is likely to cause upset in the workforce. So I was asking here for briefing notes for the board. How could employee dissatisfaction impact on organisational change? Now, it's very important to read the question here. Some people are just going to regurgitate and say, when undertaking change, you do unfreeze, change, refreeze. The contextual factors of change are blah, blah, blah. That's not the question. The question is asking how dissatisfaction might impact on change. So, if people aren't happy, they might not participate in the change. They might refuse to change. We need to develop these ideas and get a maximum of 10 marks. Yep. Next question, I also added an exhibit with, which was an extract from the board meeting. It was talking about marketing. It was basically pushing you towards something on e-marketing. So you were asked to provide notes for the board here, which assesses the benefit or the e-marketing could provide for Mercer. Yeah. So make sure you brush up on your marketing knowledge. Make sure you brush up on your e-marketing knowledge. It's something that, lends itself to things in the pre-scene. Also in Mercer's information, they were talking about social responsibility and sustainability. Now, in that area, you might look at the Eco Management and Audit Scheme, EMAS. Make sure you're familiar with it. Make sure you know what you have to do to comply with EMAS, what areas should be included in an environmental policy. Yeah, it was slides, it was communication skills, so remember that. But, how do we know whether someone is being socially responsible? Well, sometimes we get independent, objective opinion from something like EMAS to let external stakeholders know we're doing okay. We could maybe link some of this into integrated reporting as well. We did a full answer on this, but just make sure in the notes that you've made, you're happy with those areas. This question I set was one which wasn't really inspired by any academic theory, but it was asking you to think about the consequences of what were going on, the commercial implications of accelerating a transition from print to digital publishing. Now, you had to give opinions here. This answer would require quite a lot of planning. I did give you some pointers. I said you should consider sustainability of revenue, the impact on cost structure, the impact on profitability, exposure to platform and technology dependency, competitive positioning, workforce implications, and how the business model is going to change over time. Essentially, although publishing was declining, it was still generating hundreds of millions. So for someone just to jump in and say, get rid of it and get digital wouldn't be appropriate. You obviously had to do some planning and developing of your answer to get close to the marks that were available here. Also, commercial acumen was the lens through which you interpreted this question. The final thing I drew my attention to was the world of big data, and again I precursed it with another exhibit talking about digital subscriber information and control weaknesses, and basically asked how could you benefit from analysing and using data, and also what threats would you be exposed to. So there we have it. That is not a list of questions that are definitely coming up in the exam, but it's a list of subject areas I think if you have forgotten about or haven't covered in much depth, should go over and remind yourself. They're all key parts of the syllabus. Remember, SBL is an applied exam. It's not a technical exam. If you expect to get marks for regurgitating theory, that's not going to happen. I wish you all the best, and remember, manage your time really, really well. Again, if you've not watched it, look at the video I have on timing on my YouTube channel. I wish you all the very best.